thank you so much for joining us here at the Chicago Southland International Film Festival. I'm here with filmmaker Ines Sommer. She's the filmmaker for Seasons of Change on Henry's Farm, which hopefully you just had the opportunity to watch. We are also joined by Jess Cherry. Jess is an organic farmer who is specializing in biodiversity of Sweetwater Farm in Massachusetts. So I guess we'll just go ahead and jump right in if that's okay with you, Ines and Jess.
Yeah.
We were having a lot of really great conversation as we were waiting to go live, as I asked Jess if he had an opportunity to watch the film. And so I guess if it's okay, I'll start with Jess. If you can talk to us a little bit about your experience as an organic farmer and your experience watching this film.
Yeah, so I started farming in Amherst, Massachusetts, and so I was an intern of a small farmer, and so I really learned super basic skills and learned basically what I needed to be able to do to farm. And then I moved to Oregon and really did an apprenticeship with a farmer and learned how to seed save and how to plan for a whole season and how to go about the whole season and how to finish up the season. And in that season, that farmer retired. So then I took over his operation, and I had to kind of figure it out with his guidance how to farm by myself and with a whole organic operation, seed saving and going to farmers markets. And so from there until now, it's been kind of just this long process of figuring out all the skills I need to do the tasks that I need to do to grow the food that I need to for my community.
So your experience is not that unlike Chris, the character of Chris. Is that the right character, Ines, who sort of takes over for Henry for a year? Would you say that you saw a lot of your own challenges in what Ines was able to capture?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I feel for Chris, you know, that the first season of taking over is kind of heart-wrenching because, you know, you almost know the success that the elder farmer had and his comfortability with the land and with the changes that were slower while he was farming, and maybe they're more extreme now. And then you jump into a position where you're having to adjust on the fly without really knowing anything. And you have your base, but your base only catches you so much. So, you know, the scenes of the unpredictable rains and the extremities of the rains is just kind of how it goes now. And this year we had a drought in New England where, you know, it really wasn't having that before. And so there's all these minor adjustments that kind of keep you on your toes. So I feel for Chris.
Some feel not so minor. But,
yeah, exactly.
And as I wonder, you know, as Jess is sort of talking about this younger generation stepping into these giant shoes, right? You found this amazing character in Henry, doing some really incredible stuff. I wonder how you came to Henry as a character, and did you know that he was going to be taking a year off when you started filming with him?
You know, I would love to first comment on something that Jess just said, because I think when I started filming at the farm, I didn't quite know how intimately a farmer needs to know his land in order to farm sustainably, which is a very different kind of view than folks who farm, you know, who monocrop or the more industrial ag, right? Where it's a much more almost transactional sense between, you know, we're putting, that's the input and that's the output, and somehow the machines are in between and so on. But this, what I saw in Henry walking in the fields was just this incredible knowledge about every inch of his farm. And that, you know, as an outsider, that was really eye-opening to me, you know, that even within one farm, that there's so many different kind of microclimates and so on, and that this kind of knowledge is really just acquired over years. So that in some way we're not, as end consumers of this beautiful produce, we're really not aware that it's not just the physical labor, but it's also the deep knowledge that goes into that sort of farming. And that was kind of a revelation to me. And then to go back to your question, Rachel, I think the intent was first to make a short piece about kind of who are the good people who are bringing us this good food, and was actually somebody else who wanted to start that. I came on board, then she had to leave, and I just went ahead with it. And the idea had been that we would film one weekend, and that turned into many years, clearly. so short, but into something, you know, much deeper and longer. And part of that was just getting to know Henry and his family better, and thinking, you know, there is something there that warrants a longer kind of engagement. And when Henry said that he would go to Japan, I had no idea. I was like, I'm just starting this film, and now that's the end of the film, right? That was nice. Like, a few weeks of filming and now it's over. So, but in some way it's also reflective of how I approach this project, that I can't just force my vision onto what's unfolding, but if I have enough, you know, commitment and daring maybe to say, okay, I'm just going to see how this unfolds. I'm not going to predict how the interns will do for this year. I think that allowed me to just keep going, you know, and kind of trusting the process. And clearly I could have made a film that ends before Henry goes to Japan, would have been a short. It could have been just that year before he comes back. So, you know, in each film project, there are multiple versions of that film buried, right? And I'm glad that I stuck it out. It's a different film now. The same, you know, I didn't know he would go to Japan. I also didn't think that this would be a climate change film, you know? This was not the intention when we went in, but that's where, you know, Henry went in terms of his thinking, but also the whole world is much more aware of it. So it had to be part of it, right?
Yeah, I'm really glad you stuck it out too. We really get those layers because you allowed, you know, we went with Chris on his journey, and you can see how nervous he is. I'm nervous for him.
Brutal.
Right, on this journey, and how is he going to pull this off? And you know, I was listening to what Jess was saying about you know, all of this knowledge that the farmer has, and Ines, what you're saying about this intimate knowledge that you have of your land, you know, and we see Henry come back, and you know, he knows that these guys are really unhappy that he's coming back when he is. And I wonder, would he have been able to adapt differently? I guess it's not really a fair question to ask. Would he have been able to adapt differently having had that intimate knowledge? And Jess, how do you find yourself adapting to these changes in the environment, things that the people before you didn't really have to deal with in the same way?
Yeah. Well, so I have kind of an interesting experience with jumping from Oregon, where I started my own practice, to Massachusetts, which is completely different. And you know, part of the reason why I did jump, and I had worked on farms there before, the couple years before, and the reason why I moved is because I couldn't put up with the smoke. So the wildfires, which is really prevalent when when I was there, and it still is, and it's probably going to be more and more. And then so I moved to Massachusetts, which was a completely different climate, and you know, there was a different frost day, and you know, different plants like to be grown there than like to be grown in Oregon. So I kind of had to learn all of that, and then from my time being here, the year difference between each season has been extreme. It's been unpredictable. And usually there's a spectrum which the farmer can kind of rely on, where, oh, it might rain this less, or it might rain this much, or it might be this temperature, that temperature, but or the winter might be mild, or you know, there's all these different ranges that the farmer can kind of expect on and plan for, and kind of project in the future, and that's getting kind of all wonky. And so my plan for my first year in Massachusetts is dramatically different than what it is now. And so it's just kind of like, for me, it's just noticing that, and charting it, and trying to stay with it, and being open to changes, and doing the best I can. It's kind of like all of that combined.
Right, that adaptability,
Mm-hmm.
the same adaptability that Ines needed to keep filming.
Precisely. I mean, I loved her story. She's talking in farmer language there. She's like, there's the plan, and the plan is good, and I plan all winter, and that's all, and I plan every day, right? But then there's like the actual thing that's happening, and so the plan has to adapt to the actual thing, or else it won't float. And so there's this constant conversation between plan and actuality, and if you don't listen to what's actually happened, you get smacked a bit.
Yeah, we do hear Henry addresses that just a little bit, where he talks about, you know, the summer maybe starting sooner or going later, and, you know, trying to make those small adjustments.
Well, he's actually making a lot of adjustments. I think he's been experimenting a lot with different things to grow. That you know, the flooding has only gotten worse for him. So every year, from what I've been told, is worse than the previous year. So, you know, he's I think this idea with this channel that redirects some of the rainwater back to the creek. I think he's gone through with some of that, but that's all, you know, only working to a certain extent. So he might actually have to leave his like very rich bottomland and move his operation up onto the hill. So for me as an outsider, the question is really also like, how much can farmers adapt, right? If farming has always been part of the farmer's knowledge is the predictability of the weather and understanding that, you know, and maybe there are some, you know, sudden weather occurrences that you can't predict, but now it's like this constant back and forth. And how much of that can a farmer actually, you know, deal with before it's a total loss? I know with Henry, they also started with a terrible drought this year, and then, you know, a sudden rainfall of like 6 inches in one afternoon. So he lost a lot of, you know, crops throughout the year. I think he caught up towards the end of the summer, but overall, I'm just also thinking at all this labor, right? That goes into that. It's all lost, and it's not just him localized, but if we're kind of seeing that in a grander scale, I mean, to me, it's like really this urgent call. If farmers can deal with maybe this much climate change, what if we don't get this under control? And, you know, there will be a point of no return where we cannot adapt any further. And what then, right?
And it's amazing too, Ines, because it's the labor. And the one thing that I learned from your film with the rain is that, because you think, okay, rain drowns the plants, but it washes away that rich soil. And that I don't think had ever occurred to me, this soil that you've spent years cultivating, and you've got your cover crop, right? Your cover crop, which is helping to bring in the nutrients, and all of that just gets washed away with the rain. And that's such a loss. Mm-hmm. How do you recover from that?
We need to have more dynamic farming systems, and we need things to catch the soil. We need things to hold the soil. And so this is like less tilling. This is like less disrupting the ecosystem that already exists. This is like planting perennials more. And so, like for Henry, in seeing that film, I was thinking, oh, along that, area that keeps getting flooded, maybe we can plant more trees and shrubs and things that can really hold the soil. So if it get washed, it can be contained and then dispersed again. Because the soil is living, and it's a whole ecosystem, and there's a bunch of beings in it. It's not just this inert thing that we have to just dump some, nitrogen on, and then we can grow things. It's this living thing. So it's a matter of creating systems that are resilient to changes, that are resilient to floods, that are,
resilient and adaptive.
Exactly.
Which is coming back to that, if you're building systems to contain the soil, then you're sort of adapting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, our discussion is so much directed towards the farmers and what farmers can do. Mm. I'm also thinking about viewers who are most likely not farmers. There will be maybe a small percentage of farmers watching this, but there are people who are interested in organic produce, I'm guessing, So what can they do in this context? Because I think so much of what we as end consumers know about farming is like, oh, chemicals bad, organic good, but it doesn't go much beyond that. And I don't think we should all have to, become completely versed in what exactly a farmer needs to do. But I feel there needs to be some education of the end consumer to understand, what are the challenges now. It's not as easy as just, in the city switching on the air conditioning versus not on a day when it's hot. Oh, climate change, that's, how hot it'll get in the summer,
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I loved just Henry's farm, one kind of principle I go on is, know your farmer by your name. Mm-hmm. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to know what the person who's growing our sustenance is doing, how they're living, how they're growing the food. And the more intimate we can get with that, the more I think the things will just align the way they need to. But if we detach ourselves a little bit, if we, don't really know where our food is coming from, if we're going in that direction, I think things are gonna get more and more desensitized, and we aren't gonna understand Henry or Chris or me or anyone who actually is growing the food. And so for me, it's just a matter of talking to the people that you're getting your potatoes from or your tomatoes from, and really seeing what's happening, because the farmer knows, and I'm not saying I know, but the farmer knows,
And you did such a beautiful job capturing that too, though, as because Henry talks about educating his buyers, right? And I mean, when we go with him, when he's leaving at 1 a.m. to set up for the farmer's market, right? Yeah. You're really like, oh my God, maybe I'm not paying enough for this produce. Look at what he's going through to get us this great food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of his customers at the Evanston Farmers Market were so appreciative to finally get kind of that look behind the curtain to understand, oh, this is what I'm eating, this is where this comes from, and all the work that goes into it. I think Henry's had some terrible problems with his truck this summer, like a tire blew out on the way to the market, all kinds of like challenging things. So I think people appreciated that even more to understand, like, oh, this is how that ties in, right? Mm-hmm. You know, I also would love for, you know, for people who are interested in that or like to do that, to start growing some of their own food, you know? Yeah. I mean, I have a backyard. It's not very manicured, but I've been raising a lot of vegetables this summer, and it's been so fun. And that's really something that was prompted from making the film. I didn't really grow anything aside from tomatoes before. And because there is this distance now from us as, you know, mostly city dwellers, to not just to nature, but also to understanding that food is something that we can grow ourselves, right? That connection that was there for millennia has been cut to a certain degree.
Absolutely. We have in my neighborhood a local community garden, and those are really all over the city, sort of tucked away and all kinds, you know, ours is in between a couple of alleys. If you were just walking by, you wouldn't even know that it was there. So all of this land that is being unused, reclaiming it and growing food on it, I think is a huge thing that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't mean to undercut farmers.
No,
we still need.
I'm with that. I'm a seed saver, so really my mission as a farmer is growing enough seed for everyone to garden with. I think the you know, if we just focus on the farmer, that's good, and I think the farmer needs a lot of respect. But everyone needs to be growing just a little bit. And part of it is like we need to know that we are of the earth. We come from the earth and we eat the earth, and we need to know that reciprocity. And with our culture, it seems like for whatever reason we forgot that, or we try to ignore that, or you know, we do a lot of things that separate ourselves from it. But if we all have just even just a pot of you know, a tomato that grows through the summer, just to remind us what that relationship with the plant is like, how much work it takes, and how much food we get from it, so we know what the farmer is doing, because the farmer is doing more than we can comprehend. I'm doing more than what I know my CSA members or my farmers markets customers are thinking. I work more than what they know. And so if you just tend one plant, maybe you can understand a little bit. If you tend two, maybe you can understand. And if you tend 1,000, maybe you can understand.
No, we're not going to go there.
Yeah, don't worry, Jess. No,
we'll start small.
we're not ready for that. But I will say, in my little corner of the city, we made a real push to bring back pollinators. And in the last 2 years, our monarch population and our bee population, I have personally observed, have grown significantly, because we've made a real attempt to plant flowers on every corner, to continue planting vegetables, to plant milkweed. So it can be done. But we all have to do it together. Yeah. I suppose I should ask, because we're talking about the audience and what they can do, if the audience has any questions that they'd like to chime in with, now would be a good time. for that.
Yeah, hey guys. We have a few audience members wondering for Ines, how did you find Henry and his farm and his story? And why did you decide to use him as the subject in your documentary over other local farmers?
So Henry is a really well-known farmer because of the Evanston Farmers Market, where he's been selling produce for like well over 20 years now. So he's kind of has a big following too in terms of his customer base. I actually didn't think that I was going to make a film about sustainable agriculture. It wasn't like I had the idea to make a farm film and then I'm casting for a farmer, because that would definitely be a legitimate way of doing a documentary. It was the other way around, that I was introduced to Henry and also to his sister Tara, who's my co-producer, and she's a wonderful writer and had written this book, Seasons on Henry's Farm. So similar title, we kind of stole the title from her book. And when I read that book, which is a year on the farm, dividing it into seasons, but also a lot of recipes and so on, it's just a beautiful lyrical kind of look at this life on the farm. That's kind of how I got to the story, rather than the other way around. Here's the topic and I'm going to cast for the topic. It was more a personal connection and knowing of Henry.
Okay. And then another question about your film is, how did the decision about global warming come about to bring it in subtly and then have it fully at the end?
So the kind of realization for Henry that he was already witnessing climate change all along throughout his 20 years, that just really hit him with his stay in Japan. And I think that often happens to us if we are kind of moved out of our regular surroundings and our everyday kind of obligations. All of a sudden we have kind of insights about what's happening in our lives, kind of that time for self-reflection. I had heard through Tara, my co-producer, that Henry was having those thoughts and that he had written a letter to his kids that was very heartfelt and long and really deep. So I knew when he came back in the winter and was going to take over farm operations again, I knew that was on his mind, right? But I hadn't filmed anything with him. That happened in Japan, that he was writing the letters. So a while into filming, I asked him to basically read the letter for us, and then we started weaving it into the film material. And then we also combed, my editor Liz Carr and Melissa Stern, we combed through some of the material. Were there any hints of climate change indications in earlier material that we had? And there was just a tiny little bit of it. So we were able to kind of fold that into the film. I think for the viewer, it unfolds in such a seamless way, right? But it's really in editing that you're able to, kind of foreshadow some of the things that the story will tell you later on, right? Just like you would do in fiction. And we can do the same thing with documentary. We can use a soundbite that was recorded much later and kind of fold it into the earlier part of the film to kind of set the ground for, oh, this theme is going to come up. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Another question, someone thought the musical score was really great and merged seamlessly with the film's changes in seasons, themes, and tone. Did you have someone in mind prior to post-production that you knew would be great for the job?
So Takenobu is the name of the musician. Nick Ogawa is his regular name, but he goes by Takenobu. He does a lot of performances too. He's a composer. He had done the score for another film where I had noticed his work. And so I reached out to that filmmaker and said, I really like the score on your film. Can you put me in touch with this composer? And that was a really great way to work with him, because we reached out to him when we were at Rough Cut stage. so that he could look at the film and then come up with, you know, going back and forth between my editor and him, like, this section will need music. Do you have something that would fit that? And then they would go back and forth, and Liz in that case would, you know, cut some of it even tighter to the picture. So it's an interesting process to work with a composer. It's not like you're done with the film and now you'll ship it off to the composer, but it's actually all throughout the editing process. And I think that's why it feels so, that the score is really part of the film, right? It's not something that you just add on later on.
Okay. Another audience member was wondering, why did you decide to focus on Henry's daughter out of the 3 children? Was it because her life transitioning at the time was similar to the theme of change, or was it because of another reason, such as she was more present during the making of the film?
You know, both of those reasons for sure. I think the 2 sons are really not so interested in farming, right? So I thought by, you know, getting to know Zoe, I thought there was an interesting kind of tension between the decision that she has to make, you know, in terms of does she want to go into a career of writing and academia or farming? I think she really embodied that tension. While his sons were, that was just not their thing, right? So I chose to follow Zoe a little bit at some point because I thought, what is the entry point for a younger viewer to a film like this? You know, they're, you know, a farmer in his 50s, they're, you know, people who are already on their career paths, but what about a college age kid or even a high school age kid? You know, how do they enter a story like that? And so it was a little bit strategic to follow Zoe's story. And I think when I've showed the film to some of my students or excerpts, they really respond well to that, because that question of what am I going to do next
good point.
is on their mind, right?
Okay. I'm going to give you a bit of a break. This next question's for Jess. Do you see a relationship between small crop / organic farming and urban farming? Are these both parallel solutions to climate change and healthy eating? And do any initiatives exist between local farmers like you and urban farmers?
Yeah, that's a tough question. You know, there are parallels. There's a diversification that is happening that I think is really important between the two. My scale is going to be different than any urban farmers. I'm working on about 3 acres, and that's just that amount of land is not necessarily accessible, because I'm about 60 miles out of Boston, and so I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so I think intentions are the same, but capacity is different. And really, my mission is seed saving, and so I'm trying to provide as much seed as I can to all types of growing areas and situations. And so what I'm doing is I'm saving a bunch of seed, all sorts of seed, diversified seed, and trying to make them accessible to the urban farmer and to the rural farmer and to the suburban farmer, and so there's bridges there, but they're living in a different. It's different. It is just different. There has to be different solutions to different areas, and there, in my opinion, needs to be more solutions going to urban areas than to rural areas. And there's rooftop growing right now, and there's community gardens, and there's green walls, and all of that stuff isn't really something and any rural farmer has to think about. And so that's just the obvious difference. and something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, definitely. There's no more audience questions coming in, but one question I did have for Ines is, what was it like committing to a project that took 6 years in the making, and what did it feel like once you were finally finished with it?
Good question. But, you know, before I go into that, I was listening to Jess about, you know, the differences between urban agriculture and like traditional farming. And I'm thinking, you know, there's so much ingenuity and a lot of people kind of starting projects or maintaining projects because they feel so passionate about it. But I'm wondering what's happening on the policy level, because in some way it's like all just on the private sector right now. While the industrial ag gets so many subsidies, organic farmers don't get subsidies. So there is it's completely out of whack. And we're asking kind of for people who are doing sustainable farming, we're asking them to shoulder a lot more than what the industrial agriculture is shouldering, right? And to me, that's, you know, it's not great if, you know, as end consumers, we're not even aware of that necessarily. So I feel there needs to be more information about that, and there needs to be changes in terms of the policies too, right?
And as now is a good time to tell everybody about your voter guide that we popped into the chat.
Yes, so the Illinois Stewardship Alliance has a farm and food voting guide for Illinois, and you can look up your congressional district on it and see what your both the incumbent and people running for office, what their positions are in terms of farm policies. So that might be for folks who are interested in that sort of thing. That might be a good thing to consult before you go out and vote on November 3rd or earlier.
It's another thing that we can do as viewers, right? You know, we might not be farmers, but we can support the people who are growing our food as opposed to those who are getting these subsidies that you're talking about.
And I'd love to circle now back to Jake's question. I didn't just put it aside. You know, when you start a project, you never think it will take 6 years. It's
funny, you never think it'll take 6 years, but you do know that it will.
Yeah, so I've made 3 long format documentaries so far, and 2 of them took 5 or 6 years. One was a little quicker, but I think it ultimately has to do with funding. You know, part of it is certainly if you do kind of more longitudinal stories, you need to give yourself more time. That's definitely part of it. But the other part is if funding for independent films just comes in such, you know, little spurts, you know, you have just enough to film for 2 more weeks, you have just enough to hire an editor for X amount of months. So, you know, unlike more commercially inclined folks, that's just the trade-off. You know, we can kind of pursue our own stories, but if it's not underwritten, you know, by a television station or has a lot of capital behind it, we're forced to do this in a slower way, right?
I also want to let folks know that the website for Seasons of Change is up, and there's a Facebook page for Jess's farm, Sweetwater Farm, and also for the Quabbin Seed Exchange, which Jess was talking about saving seeds. So you can find that website or that Facebook page as well.
Yeah, I shared all those for them.
Okay, great.
Sort of a follow-up question for Ines is, did you capture everything you needed before you entered post-production, or did you end up having to do a lot of pickups?
So we did 2 rounds of editing. So the first round of editing was in 2018, more or less, and 2017/18. You know, it's kind of hard to keep track of all these years. But, you know, for the last third of the film, I had to go back to finish it out, right? So we started editing when the final act was not in place yet. But that's also kind of common to kind of weave back and forth in this type of documentary filmmaking.
Okay. A question for both of you guys is, what other resources are available to find out more about local sustainable farmers? Should we just go to our local farmers market?
It's a good place to start.
As a consumer,
if I want to jump in, definitely the local areas is the best. Everyone has farmers in their area, and they would love you to reach out to them. And then from there, there's definitely more public figures that are sort of heading the regenerative, the organic culture that we would all probably benefit from. And so, yeah, there's like, I love Soul Fire Farm. They're in New York. They're doing a lot of good social justice work, and you know, they're really growing well and supporting people. I was an intern of the Rogue Farm Corps program in Oregon. They're a great program. But really it does start from the local area. It's the farmer that's closest to you is going to help you out the best.
So I think that for Chicago, there are a bunch of resources. On the one hand, you know, there are clearly the farmers who sell at the farmers market, and I would definitely, you know, recommend to patronize them. A lot of them have CSAs too, just like Henry has a CSA. He has some CSA down in Central Illinois, but also one for his Evanston farmers market customers. So that's an option. If you're just thinking of like, where do I get this kind of food? I think the more you can shop locally, the better. So not to diss Whole Foods or, you know, the larger companies, but I think the thing that viewers might want to consider is, you know, what's the transportation for the food that I'm consuming and so on. So, and how can I help support what's locally grown? So there are a number of farms that people are, you know, CSA customers for here in the Chicago area. People can tap into that. If they're interested in urban agriculture, there is something called the Advocates for Urban Agriculture, and I put the link into the chat that Jake can access. They're kind of like an umbrella organization, so they will have a lot of lists of all the different urban ag initiatives in Chicago. So that would be a great website to start and just to dig around, like what's in my neighborhood, and that might be listed. So I would, you know, that's kind of like a catch-all kind of site to start with if they're interested in more like hyper-local ag projects that they might want to visit, buy from, or even get involved and start to grow their own vegetables. I think something to also recommend is, you know, if you want to find out more, please go to the website of the film. We also list where other screenings are. And I'm going to pull up the Gene Siskel Film Center because they've been supporting the film and have been running it on their website for several months now, and I'm super proud of that. So if you like the film, tell people to watch it. I mean, this is an independent film. I have zero marketing budget. This is all, you know, kind of a passion project. Anything that you see about the film, it was generated by me and by my co-producer, Tara Brockman. So help us spread the word.
Definitely. We got time for a couple more questions. An audience member wants to know, what was it like filming in Japan in comparison to on Henry's farm?
Well, now the secret comes out. I didn't get to film in Japan. I didn't have the budget. So this is a low budget film. What I did is I got in touch with somebody who was from Japan, who was an assistant editor who I had met at some point, and she had gone back to Japan. So I reached out to her and she helped relocate a Japanese cameraman. And so everything was done remotely. I gave him a shot list. I told him what I wanted. I put him in touch with Henry and Hiroko, and I think he had a great time filming with them because usually he was only getting jobs like that were more in urban settings. So for him, it was a great adventure, and I thought he did a great job. So all remote. I had a budget for 1 day.
Interesting. I didn't know that. There's no more questions coming in. Did you guys have any closing comments you would like to make before we sign off?
I think I'd love to hear from Jess some more about the future of farming, because that's such a theme in my film. And we talked earlier before we were going live about kind of this next generation of farmers that you're part of too. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you see young people entering this field? What are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, it's a big I don't know, to be honest. The mean or median age of the farmer is, 50 plus, closer to 60. And so, I don't know what's going to happen. What I know is needed is this more bioregional, local, biodiverse, interconnected, interdependent farm system that will help provide for us. And if we don't keep shifting us towards that, I don't know how resilient we can be. And what it takes is us, my generations, the people beyond me, getting excited about connecting with the earth, getting passionate, which I think your film really does, getting passionate about food, about how, 50 or 600 or whatever Henry was growing, which is amazing. That many diverse beings, growth patterns are. It gets getting excited about that, to be able to do it, to be able to provide for our community, ourselves, and then beyond. And so it's just, the more films like this, the more we talk about how the struggle is real, climate change is real, it's hard every season. This season was so hard, but learning, like this year, I learned how to grow onions really good. And I learned how to grow greens really good. And, it just that little tweak into it that hopefully it'll bring a few more, and then maybe those few can bring a few more. And it just takes that, just, getting excited about actually being on this earth and eating from this earth and living and connecting with this earth, that hopefully, and I see my generation being curious about it. And then we just need to get over the hard aspects of it, which is a lot of work.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Jess, because it is a lot of work. And I know a lot of the interns who come to Henry's farm don't necessarily continue in farming.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how much turnover you see in people who take on this challenge and don't continue with it.
Yeah. Right now, I see mostly dabbling. People doing internships and people doing a couple years. But I know people are curious about me living this life. And so I know people are interested in at least thinking about it. But as far as getting through the work, I'm not sure yet. I'm in the middle of it myself.
At least this is a good place to start.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually quite a few of the interns end up becoming farmers of Henry's. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's not such a bad ratio, actually. Maybe not necessarily exactly the traditional farming that we might picture. So Chris and Adrian are still outside of Carbondale, and they're doing all the things for this brewery, microbrewery there, you know, with foraging and, you know, growing much smaller quantities of things. So, so maybe that's not what we immediately picture when we think, oh, a farmer, right? But I think the different ways that people can integrate that into their lives too. You know, I know that Zoe, the daughter, for instance, she went to grad school and just got her degree in creative writing or poetry from University of Michigan. She's now doing a year of fellowship, and then she's coming back to the farm. And I think she's always dreamt about, you know, having something that has farming and maybe some other cultural aspects in it. You know, I mean, it's really for all of us to kind of reinvent what this can look like, right?
Right.
So
in many ways, I think we need to have our hands in many things, and farming is one of the most important things because it's what helps us live. But just, you know, like I think we also could still have other passions as long as many other people agree that food is a good thing for us to cultivate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of dispersing the energy. And so right now we have a culture of, you know, the farmer in the village. Perhaps we can grow to the place where there's 10 plus farmers in the village that can float the village, you know.
It's all interdependent.
Exactly.
And that's what we need to realize. Yes, art and farming and just living are all dependent on one another. Yeah.
You know, we showed the film before the pandemic at Moses. That's the Midwest Organic, kind of a large Midwest Organic farming conference. And that was really encouraging to see how many young farmers there were. And, you know, the film was just one of many, many, you know, workshops and seminars that they have going on parallel. So it wasn't like a huge crowd, but it was really great to show the film to people who are actually doing the work, you know, and how they felt that it rang true, similar to what you were saying, Jess. But also to see how people were teaching each other stuff, right? There were tons of like interesting workshops and so on. So I think the resources that people need, you know, that probably needs also be advertised more, you know. So if somebody wants to go into farming, they could do an apprenticeship. Maybe they could go to a conference like that and kind of get a feel for what are these people about and so on, you know.
I mean, that's what I think you're touching on, and kind of intergenerational farming and kind of the lapse between generations. And that's my situation. You know, great grandpa was a farmer, but beyond that, you know, I don't have any connection. And so it's like, where is the entry point is kind of what you're talking about. And we need to have a bunch of different entry points so that we can get as many people active as possible. And so maybe it's a conference, and maybe it's a community garden, and maybe it's volunteering at the closest farm. And, you know, there's all these different entry points. And so it's like a way of showing as many as possible to get as many possible people as we can, you know.
A rebuilding of community.
Exactly. That's what it is.
In general, yeah. Yeah, I think this is a great film, Ines. I think it's wonderful, and I'm just so glad that you made it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wish we could see our audience and see, you know, what people think. And I don't know, Jake, were there any other comments for us?
Yeah, just a couple comments. Suzanne says, beautifully photographed. Congratulations on the cinematography. And thank you to Henry. And then Nick says, thanks for the film and the conversation. Best to you in the future. And Josh says, thank you so much, Ines and Jess, for all the great information.
Yes, thank you. You're both a wealth of knowledge. And it's really been an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's great that the festival is, bringing us, giving us this opportunity to have that conversation too. And
it's true. We wouldn't,
we're grateful
if we had met in person, Jess, we wouldn't have had you here.
Yeah.
So I guess we have to call that a small COVID blessing. Right. If we can find those silver linings. Yeah. So that's really great. And I know that there's the final feature film is tomorrow, Jake?
Yeah, tomorrow at noon. It's Mustang Saviors, directed by David Glossberg.
Yeah, so tomorrow at noon, those of you who are here, if you are interested in seeing that final feature film, it's about veterans who make relationships with captured Mustang horses and how those relationships help save both of them.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And we'll have a live filmmaker Q&A just like this at, I think it's 1:45, right after the film.
And then I think there's a shorts program too. Is that right, Jake?
Yeah, there's 6 short programs that will be available until midnight tomorrow. So everyone just keep watching.
So you still have time. You still have time to get all that great viewing in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to Suzanne and to Josh and Jake and everybody else who was involved in the festival for putting this together. It's really excellent.
No problem. Thank you. It was great to have your movie in the festival.
Really great. Thank you.
So I think that about does it. Thank you guys once again for being here.
Thank you.
And from the Chicago Southland International Film Festival, have a good night.